For in one lie, who was playing whom? Caleb Warren woke up in the middle of the night to a strange noise. In the darkness, his bedroom seemed even emptier, even though Laurel was sleeping next to him, as always. The noise came from somewhere in the hallway, as if someone had accidentally knocked over a crystal vase on the table near the front door. Caleb quietly got out of bed, trying not to wake his wife. He grabbed the baseball bat that was kept in the closet and went to check. When he turned on the hallway light, he saw a small envelope lying in the middle of the carpet. Neither the doors nor the windows were open, which made him uneasy. He picked up the envelope and noticed it was unsigned. The sense of unease grew, but curiosity won out. Turning on the light in the living room, Caleb carefully opened it. Inside were several photographs. Laurel sitting at a table in an unfamiliar cafe with a man he had never seen before. They were smiling at each other, and one of the shots captured the moment when the man touched her hand. Caleb stopped, feeling his heart start to race. It was strange. No text, no explanations, just photos. Who had taken them? Why had they been left by his door? And what did it all mean? He ran his finger along the edge of one of the photos, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Then a thought crossed his mind. Maybe this was some kind of mistake? Laurel had always been honest and straightforward. She had no secrets, or at least, he thought so. The next morning, Caleb tried to act normal. Laurel sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone and drinking her usual morning coffee. "Good morning," he said, sitting across from her. "Good morning. You look tired. Did something happen?" "Nothing special. Just didn't sleep well." She nodded and turned back to her phone. Her behavior seemed normal, but now Caleb began to notice small things that hadn't seemed suspicious before. How quickly she hid her phone screen when he approached, or how her tone changed when she spoke about work. Throughout the day, these thoughts plagued him. Who was the man in the photos? Caleb remembered that one of the shots showed the name of the cafe. He decided to go there after work. The cafe was small and cozy, located in a quiet neighborhood. Caleb walked inside and felt an odd sense of déjà vu. He couldn't explain why, but this place seemed familiar. "How can I help you?" asked the waiter when Caleb approached the counter. "I'm looking for someone. A man who comes here often. Maybe you know him?" Caleb showed the photo from the envelope. The waiter frowned, studying the photo carefully. "Yes, that's Liam. He comes here quite often. Usually with a woman." "I see that's her," he said, pointing to Laurel in the photo. Caleb felt the ground beneath him tremble. "Do they often come here together?" he asked, trying to hide his emotions. "Once a week, maybe twice. They usually sit in the far corner." "Thanks," Caleb said, leaving the cafe. His mind was racing with questions. This couldn't be a mere coincidence. He decided to dig deeper, but he didn't want to inform Laurel until he was sure. He needed to find out who Liam was, why he spent so much time with Laurel, and who had left those photographs. Caleb returned home, his thoughts chaotic. He felt as if he had stepped into someone else's reality, where everything he knew had turned upside down. Laurel was sitting in the living room, watching a show on her tablet. Her face was relaxed, as if nothing had happened. "How was your day?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Normal," he replied, trying to hide his unease. Caleb felt a strange dissonance between her behavior and what he had learned. Every time she laughed or joked, it seemed like just a mask. But if it was true, what was she hiding? And was Laurel to blame? Or was she perhaps playing someone else's game too? The next morning, Caleb decided to approach the situation more carefully. He thought about how to gather more information without raising suspicion. The first person he reached out to was Nicole Fletcher. Nicole had known Laurel since their college days. She was the kind of friend who showed up at their house uninvited, always with hot gossip or unexpected gifts. Nicole always seemed overly interested in Laurel's life. Caleb decided she might know something. "Nicole, hey," he said when he called her. "Caleb, what a nice surprise. Is everything okay with Laurel?" Yeah, everything's fine. I just wanted to talk. Maybe we can meet for coffee?" "Oh, of course. I'm free this evening." They met at a small cafe near the city center. Nicole looked, as always, confident and a little condescending, playing the role of the caring friend. "You look worried, Caleb. Is something wrong?" she asked as they sat at the table. Just a few thoughts that won't leave me alone, he replied. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in Laurel's behavior recently? Nicole tensed up, though she tried to hide it. What do you mean? I don't know. Maybe she's having some problems at work? Or something else. She paused, as if thinking about her answer. Caleb, you know Laurel. She always keeps everything under control. If she has any difficulties, she definitely won't show them. Do you know who Liam Richards is? He asked directly. Nicole flinched. Her eyes darted for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Liam? Yeah, I've heard of him. He's one of Laurel's clients. Nothing special. Nothing special? Then why do they meet so often outside of work? Caleb, you're imagining things. Laurel devotes herself to work 110%. If she spends time with clients, it's only for work. Her words seemed convincing, but something in Nicole's tone made Caleb more suspicious. Her responses were too quick, too well thought out. He decided not to press her further, but remembered every detail of their conversation. The next link in this story was Max Danforth, a colleague of Laurel's who occasionally had dinner at their house. Caleb always considered him pleasant, although somewhat too charismatic. His smile was often a bit forced, and his jokes were always a bit too timely. Caleb called him, pretending to want to discuss some work idea of Laurel's. Max agreed to meet at the pub. Caleb, how's it going? Laurel didn't say you were so creative, joked Max, ordering a beer. I just wanted to discuss a few things, and maybe better understand what she's up to right now. She's a great lawyer. You're lucky to have her, Max said, raising his glass. That's for sure. But tell me, do you work with her often? Yeah, we have a few shared clients. Why do you ask? Caleb tried to choose his words carefully, so as not to reveal his suspicions. Just curious. She has so much on her plate. Sometimes I worry she's taking on too much. Max laughed. Laurel knows how to handle stress. You don't need to worry about her. The conversation with Max gave him even less than the one with Nicole, but Caleb noticed one thing. When he mentioned Liam, Max lost his confidence for a second. His smile became less natural, and he quickly changed the subject. Later that evening, Caleb returned home. Laurel was already asleep. He sat in the dark for a long time, going through the photos from the envelope. Everything around him seemed like a puzzle he needed to solve. The next morning, he accidentally overheard Laurel's phone conversation. Her tone was tense, and she kept glancing around, as if afraid someone might overhear her. Yes, I understand, but it's not as simple as you think. All right, I'll do it, but you have to promise this is the last time. When she hung up, Caleb asked, Who was that? Laurel flinched but quickly smiled. Nothing important, just work. Her answer seemed too simple. Caleb decided he needed to find out more, even if it meant breaking her trust. Caleb continued to reflect on everything he had learned, trying to find a way to gather more information without raising Laurel's suspicions. All the threads seemed to lead to one point, Liam. But the more he learned about this man, the more he realized he knew nothing. After work, he decided not to return home right away. Instead, he went to the university where Laurel had studied. Caleb thought he might be able to find something in the old archives that could shed light on her past. The librarian, an elderly man with a stern look, studied Caleb for a long time before allowing him to flip through old issues of student magazines. As Caleb flipped through the pages, he noticed several photos of Laurel. She looked young, happy, and at first glance carefree. But one of the photos made his heart stop. It was a group shot of students at some party. Laurel was in the center, standing next to a man Caleb recognized immediately. Liam. They were standing very close to each other, and even after all these years, the photo seemed too personal. Caleb took a photo of the picture with his phone and decided to move on. He found old records of student events and even articles about those who had received awards or worked in student organizations. Again, Laurel and Liam appeared in the same context. Their names were mentioned together as organizers of some charity event. Returning home, he decided to act more cautiously. Laurel was already home, preparing dinner. Caleb tried to stay natural, but the tension between them was rising. "How was your day?" she asked without looking up from her work. "Not bad," he replied, trying not to reveal his anxiety. "By the way, you mentioned that charity project you organized at university. Laurel froze for a moment and then nodded. Yeah, it was a long time ago. We organized an event to raise money for a children's hospital. Why do you ask? Just curious, he said, trying to hide his true intentions. Who helped you with that? Laurel looked at him, a little surprised, but her voice remained calm. There was a big team. I think Liam Richards was one of the key organizers. He's really talented at that kind of stuff. The mention of his name, spoken in her voice, stirred mixed emotions in Caleb. He decided not to ask anything else that evening, but his suspicions only grew stronger. That night, when Laurel had fallen asleep, Caleb sat back down at the laptop. He started searching for more information about the project. There was a brief mention in the news from that time about the event, but one phrase caught his attention. The organizers not only raised a significant amount, but also received praise for their professionalism and courage. Courage? What could that mean? Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he had to dig deeper, but every step brought him closer to something he might not want to know. Caleb sat in his car in front of Nicole's house, nervously tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. The meeting with her was risky, and he understood that, but something about her behavior had raised suspicions. Her responses to their previous conversation seemed too calculated, and her nervousness was too obvious for someone who had nothing to hide. Caleb tried to recall the details. How she avoided eye contact, how quickly she changed the subject when he asked about Liam. Nicole definitely knew something. When the door opened, Nicole looked perfect. Neat suit, soft smile, as if she had been expecting this meeting. They sat in her living room. On the table in front of them was a bottle of wine she had brought, but Caleb noticed that she wasn't planning to drink it herself. Well, Caleb, I hope this isn't about problems with Laurel? She looked him straight in the eye, but there was something in her voice that made him feel uncomfortable. I just wanted to talk. You've always been close with Laurel. I thought maybe you could help me figure things out. Nicole smiled, but the smile seemed more like a mask. Of course, you know I'm always ready to help. What's bothering you? Caleb paused, thinking about how to phrase his question. You and Laurel had a tough time in your student years, didn't you? Did you two talk a lot back then? Nicole leaned forward, as if the question had surprised her. That was a long time ago, Caleb. We were all young and made mistakes. But why do you ask? Caleb decided to take the risk. I just found a few pictures. You, Laurel, and another man. Liam Richards. You were at a charity event, I think, where something unusual happened. Her eyes changed, though she tried to hide it. Liam. She said his name almost in a whisper. He's always been too charismatic. What do you mean? Nicole lowered her gaze, fiddling with a ring on her finger. I don't know if you should know this, Caleb, but if you've already found the pictures, you probably understand that Liam is a complicated person. Caleb felt she was trying to hide something, but at the same time, her anxiety seemed genuine. Nicole, I need to know the truth. Why is he around Laurel now? She looked up at him and took a sip of wine, even though she had refused to drink before. Laurel has always been strong. But Liam, he knows how to play with people. Back in school, it seemed innocent. Parties, projects, a little flirting. But one time, he crossed the line. Caleb tensed up. What happened? Nicole held her breath. They had a conflict. Over money, over some project. Liam knew how to use people's weaknesses. I'm not sure Laurel told you the whole truth back then, but it wasn't just college drama. It was something more. Caleb felt his heart tighten. He had more questions than answers, but the conversation made it clear that Laurel's relationship with Liam was more than just work. When he left Nicole's house, his phone vibrated. An anonymous number appeared on the screen. If you're looking for the truth, stay away from Nicole. She's playing a role you don't think she is. Caleb looked back at her house. Her silhouette was visible in the window, but now she looked somehow threatening. When he got home, he found Laurel sitting in the living room. She looked up from her tablet when he entered, but there was tension on her face. Where have you been? I was talking to some friends, he replied, trying not to show his emotions. Laurel nodded, but he noticed how her fingers trembled when she picked up her cup of tea. That night, Caleb sat in the dark for a long time. The message from the anonymous number wouldn't let him rest. Who else knows about Nicole? Why is someone warning him about her? And most importantly, is she connected to Liam the same way Laurel is? The next day, he decided to continue his investigation. He went to the cafe where Liam worked and started observing the people coming in and out. After a few hours, he saw Liam leave the building and get into a black car. Caleb decided to follow him. The car took Liam to a luxury office building in the city center. Caleb stayed in his car, watching. After some time, Liam came out of the building with a woman. It was Nicole. Caleb felt as if the world had stopped. She was talking and laughing, and Liam had his hand on her shoulder. Their conversation looked friendly, but too romantic for mere acquaintances. Caleb could no longer wait. He got out of the car and headed toward them. Caleb? Nicole looked confused but quickly composed herself. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, he said, glancing at Liam. Liam smiled, but there was nothing friendly in his gaze. Caleb Warren. I've heard about you from Laurel. Nice to meet you. Caleb felt his heart tighten. The situation was getting more complicated, and the answers seemed to be buried even deeper. How do you know my name? Caleb asked, trying to keep his nerves in check. Laurel mentioned you, Liam replied, his smile almost mocking. She often talks about how you take care of her. Caleb felt a coldness inside. Laurel talked about him? But why and how? Nicole, don't you want to explain what's going on here? He turned his gaze to her, hoping to see at least some confusion. This is not what you think, she quickly responded, stepping forward to position herself between him and Liam. We were just discussing an old project. Caleb squinted. An old project? The same one that caused problems between you and Laurel? Or is it something else? Caleb, listen. Nicole tried to stay calm, but he could see her fingers clenching into fists. You're getting involved in matters you don't understand. Liam stepped closer, his presence now noticeably heavier. Caleb, maybe you should just trust your wife. She's a smart woman who always knows what she's doing. Like you? Caleb took a step back, wanting to keep both of them in sight. What are you planning? What's going on between you and Laurel? Nicole nervously glanced at Liam, but he remained unfazed. Nothing that should concern you, Liam said, his voice low and almost soothing. But if you want to dig deeper, be careful. Not all questions are worth asking. Caleb felt his anger boil inside. It's not your place to decide what I should know and what I shouldn't, he replied. Liam shrugged and turned to leave. Think about it, Caleb. Sometimes the answer is closer than you think. Nicole tried to follow him, but Caleb grabbed her by the arm. We're not done yet, he whispered. She pulled away, but for a moment, her gaze softened. You're making everything more complicated, she said. Caleb watched them walk to the car, his heart pounding. Liam's words wouldn't leave him. What did he mean by that? Once home, Caleb decided to check Laurel's journal. She had a habit of writing down even minor meetings. He found an entry about a meeting with Liam. It said, discuss terms. These words didn't explain anything but only added more confusion to the situation. The next day, Caleb returned to the cafe where Laurel and Liam often visited. The waiter looked nervous this time, but Caleb claimed to be a journalist researching local stories. Do you see this couple here often? He asked, showing the photos of Liam and Laurel. Yes, they come here regularly, the waiter replied, hesitating. Do you know anything about them? The waiter shook his head. No, but there's one strange thing. Last week, someone left a note for them. I gave it to the man, but they both looked pretty worried. Do you remember what the note looked like? Unfortunately, no, but they left it on the table when they left. Caleb felt like he was getting closer to something important, but what exactly, he still didn't know. Caleb couldn't move for a long time. The anonymous message made his heart race, and his thoughts were tangled. Why was he advised to look for answers with Nicole? How could she be connected to Liam? It all seemed too complicated, but Caleb decided to act. He decided to take it into his own hands. He knew where Nicole lived, as he had been there with Laurel at parties several times. Her house was cozy and unremarkable on the outside, but this time it looked different. At night, with the windows shut, it seemed ominous. Caleb pulled up to the house and parked a little further away to stay unnoticed. He got out, wiping sweat from his palms. Before approaching the door, he stood for a long time, staring at the darkened windows, trying to spot any movement. Caleb walked up to the door and knocked lightly. No answer. He knocked again, A little harder. Silence. He was about to turn back to the car when he noticed the door wasn't completely shut. A light push, and it opened. "Nicole," he called, stepping forward. "It's Caleb." In response, silence. An odd tension hung in the air. He entered the living room and immediately felt something was wrong. Papers were scattered on the table, and a blanket was draped over the couch, as if someone had just gotten up from there. Caleb wasn't planning to stay long, but his attention was drawn to a folder lying on the coffee table. Inside were several documents and photographs, but most importantly, among them were pictures of Liam. Caleb opened the folder and began flipping through it. There were bills, notes, and even clippings from old newspapers. One document had a name on it, Liam Richards, candidate for firm partner. "What are you doing here?" a voice came from behind. Caleb turned sharply. Nicole was standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wary. "Nicole, I came to talk, but then I saw the door was open." His voice trembled, but he held it together. "And you thought you could just barge into my house?" Her tone was cold, but there was panic in it. "Put that back. Who is Liam really?" Caleb took a step forward, holding the folder. "Are you working with him? Or for him?" Nicole closed her eyes and turned away, as if trying to find the strength to answer. "You don't understand what you're getting into," she whispered. "Liam is dangerous. I want to know the truth, Nicole. What are you hiding?" She sank into the chair and shook her head. It all started back in college. Liam was always a manipulator. He had connections, money, influence. Laurel tried to stay away from him, but he always found a way to pull her into his games. "What games?" Caleb interrupted her. Nicole looked at him with pain in her eyes. "Do you really want to know?" She began to explain. In college, Liam had organized many events, but behind the facade, he hid his schemes. He used people to cover up his machinations. The charity project Laurel had talked about was just one of those schemes. Laurel was too honest to agree, Nicole continued. But when she found out the truth, Liam threatened her. He knew too much about her family, about you, even about her career. "Why are you helping him?" Caleb clenched his fists. Nicole shook her head. "This isn't helping. It's survival. If I refuse, he will destroy me." "And now you want to say that Laurel is involved too?" Nicole looked at him with bitterness. "She's trying to fight, but Liam plays hard. He always finds a way to make people do what they don't want." Caleb felt his anger and fear building up. "This isn't over, Nicole," he said. "If he's threatening Laurel, I won't let him continue." "Be careful," she warned. "Liam is dangerous, and he knows you're getting close." Caleb left Nicole's house, holding the folder with documents. His thoughts were chaotic, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end, just the beginning. Caleb returned home, holding Nicole's folder in his hands. His mind was in chaos, but one thought stood out the most. What was it that connected Laurel with Liam in this chaotic world? Laurel was already asleep in their bedroom, and her steady breathing behind the door was the only sound in the house. Caleb walked to the kitchen, threw the folder on the table and sat down, wiping his palms on his jeans. His hands trembled as he opened the folder, as if he knew something inside would change everything. The first document he came across was a financial report. The table listed payments that initially seemed ordinary, but Caleb noticed a familiar name, Liam Richards. His name appeared next to an invoice that, according to the document, received regular large transfers. Caleb's eyes scanned the pages until he saw the source of several payments, the law firm where Laurel worked. A troubling theory began to form in his mind, but the confirmation of this thought made him freeze. One of the transfers was dated just a few days before the charity project that Nicole had mentioned. Is this a coincidence? Or is it something more? Caleb thought, flipping through the next pages. Among the papers were other documents, but his attention was drawn to a crumpled sheet with handwritten text. It was a letter addressed to Liam. The handwriting was large but nervous, as if written in a hurry. "We will finish everything by the end of the month. No traces. Keep control over Laurel and Nicole. They are our guarantees." The words written on this sheet stuck in Caleb's mind like a poisoned arrow. The letter clearly indicated that Laurel and Nicole didn't just accidentally end up near Liam. They were part of something bigger. Caleb felt his throat dry up. He took a few sips of water, trying to calm down, but it didn't help. Who was this mysterious we? What did no traces mean? And most importantly, why was Laurel involved in this? He set the letter aside and continued going through the folder. The next discoveries were several photographs. One image instantly made Caleb feel anxious. It was Laurel in the same cafe where she often met with Liam. Her face was tense, and her eyes were filled with fear. In another photograph, Liam was holding a thick envelope. In the background, Caleb could see the office building where he had seen him a few days ago. These photographs looked like clues, but Caleb couldn't piece them together into a coherent picture. Weary, Caleb leaned back in his chair. His gaze fell on the bedroom door, behind which Laurel was sleeping. She seemed so calm, so carefree lately. Was it all just a game? Or was she also trying to find a way out of this labyrinth of lies? The clock struck 3 in the morning when Caleb finally decided that he wouldn't learn anything new that night. He carefully gathered the documents back into the folder, removed its cover, and noticed something interesting. A hidden pocket. Inside, there was another note. It contained only one sentence. If you want to know the truth, call this number. Below was the phone number. Caleb felt his breath catch. Who had left this note? And was it worth calling? The next morning, Caleb woke up before Laurel. He stared at the screen of his phone for a long time, hesitating whether to dial the number. Eventually, he decided to take the risk. A dial tone, then another, and another. Finally, someone answered. Caleb? The voice was low and somewhat muffled, as if the speaker was trying to remain unnoticed. Who is this? Caleb asked, trying to suppress his anxiety. The one who wants to help you uncover the truth, the voice replied. But if you want to know more, be prepared for the consequences. What are you talking about? Caleb felt his voice tremble. Laurel and Nicole aren't who they seem. Liam is not just a manipulator. He's an executor. There are those who stand above him. If you want answers, meet me tonight at 8 at the warehouse on the outskirts of town. The connection was cut off. Caleb sat frozen with the phone in his hand, feeling his mind flood with new questions. All day long, Caleb thought about the meeting. The thought that it might be a trap tortured him, but at the same time, he knew he had no choice. If Laurel was truly in danger, he had to find a way to save her. When evening came, Caleb gathered all his courage and headed for the warehouse. His heart raced faster than usual, but now he was ready for any outcome. Caleb stood before the dark warehouse on the outskirts of town. His old car was parked several blocks away. The streetlights here barely lit up, and the only source of light was the pale moon, hidden behind clouds. The warehouse looked abandoned. Chipped walls, doors with a rusty lock, and slightly broken windows. But Caleb knew this place wasn't chosen by accident. He took a deep breath, gathered all his patience and strength, and took a step forward. The door was not locked. It opened easily with a loud creak. Inside, it was dark, but Caleb immediately smelled old wood and dust. He looked around, searching for any signs of movement, but the warehouse seemed empty. Only in the far corner flickered a faint light. Caleb moved towards it, trying not to make a sound. As he got closer, a figure of a man appeared in the light of an old lamp. It was a tall, thin man in a dark cloak and hat. His face was hidden in the shadow, but Caleb immediately knew that this stranger was no ordinary person. He stood motionless, hands in his pockets, as if waiting for Caleb. "You came," the stranger said in a calm voice. "You probably have a lot of questions. Who are you? And what do you know about my wife?" Caleb's voice was firm, but the tremor in it was noticeable. "My name won't mean anything to you. What matters is that I know what you've gotten yourself into. And if you don't stop now, things could end very badly for you and Laurel." The stranger pulled his hand from his pocket and threw a small bundle of papers onto the floor. Caleb moved closer, bent down, and picked it up. Inside were photographs and documents. One of the photos showed Laurel with Liam. They were sitting in an office, and there were some documents in front of them that looked like contracts. Another photo depicted Nicole and Liam near the same cafe where Caleb had recently learned about their meetings. But what surprised him the most was the document on top. It was a contract that mentioned a company and a large financial payment directed for partnership support. What does this mean? Caleb asked, looking up at the stranger. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Liam is not the main player in this game. He's just an executor. There are those who stand above him, and their goal is much bigger than you can imagine. Laurel ended up in this by accident. But she was used. The stranger tilted his head slightly, watching Caleb. And now you're in this too. Why are they using her? Caleb began pacing nervously. Why didn't she tell me anything? Because she's being threatened, the stranger replied. And now, since you've started digging, they'll threaten you too. Caleb fell silent, trying to process what he had just heard. He knew Laurel might be hiding something, but he never imagined that she could be in such danger. What can I do? His voice sounded helpless. You have two choices. Walk away and leave it alone. The stranger paused, staring directly at Caleb. Or go all the way and find the truth. But know this. If you choose the second path, there's no turning back. Caleb remained silent for a long time. His thoughts were chaotic. He couldn't leave Laurel, but he didn't know if he could fight the unknown power standing behind Liam. I can't leave this, he finally said. Tell me what to do. The stranger nodded, as if he had been expecting this answer. He pulled another sheet of paper from his pocket and handed it to Caleb. Here's the address. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, those connected with Liam will meet. You need to be there, but be careful. They can't know who you are. Caleb took the sheet, glanced at it, and saw the address of a luxurious hotel in the city center. He realized that now he had no choice. He was ready to take risks to protect Laurel and uncover the truth. Caleb didn't sleep all night. His mind was racing with thoughts about what he had learned and the upcoming meeting. Who were the people connected to Liam? Was there any chance of uncovering their plans without putting Laurel in even greater danger? He sat on the sofa in the living room, staring at the papers the stranger had handed him. The deeper he delved into what he was reading, the more he realized this reached far beyond personal relationships. It was a complicated web of financial manipulation, blackmail, and deception, in which Laurel was just a small link. Early in the morning, Laurel came down to the kitchen, dressed in her usual business suit. She stopped at the door when she saw Caleb. For a moment, her eyes filled with worry, but she quickly hid it behind her usual smile. You're up early, she said, sitting at the table. Did something happen? Caleb looked at her. He could feel the anger and disappointment boiling inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Just couldn't sleep, he replied. Lots on my mind. About what? Her voice was steady, but Caleb noticed how nervously she twirled her coffee cup in her hands. About you, about us, he said, looking her in the eyes. I want to know what you're hiding from me, Laurel. She froze, her smile disappearing. Her face briefly became completely emotionless, but then she looked away. I'm not hiding anything, Caleb, she said. You're imagining something strange. Imagining? He raised his voice. Then explain why your name shows up in these documents. Explain why you're meeting with Liam. Explain why I'm starting to feel like I don't even know who you are. Laurel lifted her head, her eyes shining with tears, but she held them back. I made a mistake, she said quietly, but it was a long time ago. It was before us. Before us? Caleb couldn't believe his ears. What do you mean? Liam and I, Laurel paused, searching for the words. We were together in college, and it was a difficult time. He helped me when I was in trouble, but later things changed. He started using what he knew about me, and when we met, I thought everything had been left behind. Caleb remained silent, trying to process her words. He felt something inside him break. You're still seeing him, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Laurel shook her head. I didn't want this to happen. He started blackmailing me, and I didn't know how to fight it. He threatened to ruin everything. My career, our relationship. I thought if I played by his rules, I could somehow end it. Caleb stood up from the chair and walked to the window. He stared out at the street, trying to calm down. And what else did you do, Laurel? He asked, not turning to face her. What else are you hiding? She remained silent for a few seconds, but then whispered quietly. I was with him. Recently. He made me. Caleb felt his throat dry up. He turned around, looking at Laurel, who was now avoiding his gaze. You're trying to say, you cheated on me? His voice sounded empty. It wasn't like you think, she said, her voice trembling. It was a deal. He said he would leave us alone if I did it. Caleb was stunned. He wanted to scream, wanted to ask how she could do such a thing, but the words wouldn't come. He just stood there, feeling like his world was falling apart. I wanted to protect you, Laurel said. I did it for us. For us? Caleb bitterly laughed. Do you even understand what you've done? Laurel lifted her eyes. Caleb, I know it was wrong, but you have to understand. It was the only way to save us. He shook his head. You saved us? You just destroyed everything. Laurel started crying, but Caleb could no longer look at her. He left the kitchen, leaving her alone. He needed time to think about what to do next. One thing he knew. He could no longer trust the person he loved the most. Caleb arrived at the designated location a little before 10 in the morning. The luxurious hotel in the city center looked too expensive and pompous to be the meeting place for people involved in such dirty dealings. He parked his car in a nearby neighborhood and decided to walk to avoid attracting too much attention. As he approached the main entrance, he took a deep breath. This was one of those situations where every step could turn into a disaster, but he had no other choice. Inside the hotel, there was an atmosphere of calm. The noise of the city was far behind, and now Caleb could only hear the sound of his own footsteps. He approached the reception desk and tried to appear confident. Conference hall grand, he said in a low voice. The receptionist, a young woman with a perfect hairstyle, nodded without even trying to verify his words. To the left, first elevator, 11th floor. Caleb thanked her and headed to the elevator. Inside, he felt his palms sweating. All the way up, he tried not to think about what awaited him on the 11th floor. When the doors opened, he found himself in a corridor with thick carpeting. At the end of the hallway, large double doors were visible. He opened them and entered the conference hall. The spacious room was filled with people. They all looked confident and detached, as if they had been accustomed to such meetings for a long time. Caleb quickly scanned the room, searching for Liam, and he found him. Liam was sitting at a large table in the center of the room. He was surrounded by several other men and women who looked like people making important decisions. Caleb didn't know exactly what was happening, but he sensed that he had stumbled upon something big. He decided to keep his distance, not to draw attention to himself. He joined a group of people standing by the wall, quietly discussing something. Their conversations were full of terms and phrases Caleb didn't understand, but one of them caught his attention. The contracts will be signed by the end of the week, said a man in a gray suit. What about the legal side? Has Richards made his decision? He's working on it, replied the woman next to him. But I'm not sure Nicole and Laurel will be able to handle the pressure for much longer. Caleb felt his breath catch. Their names sounded so casual, as if they were just pieces on a chessboard, easily manipulated. He was about to step forward to intervene when he heard a voice behind him. Caleb Warren, you've always been curious. Caleb turned around and saw Liam. His smile was confident, almost mocking. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, Liam continued, making a gesture for Caleb to follow him. Caleb reluctantly followed. They stepped out onto the balcony, where Liam stopped and turned to Caleb. You can't stop this, Liam said, but you can save yourself and your wife. If, of course, you stop digging. What did you do to Laurel? Caleb asked, clenching his fists. Me. Liam feigned surprise. Nothing. She didn't want herself. She's been part of this from the very beginning. And so have you. You're just the last to find out. Caleb could no longer hold back. He grabbed Liam by the collar and pressed him against the railing. What are you hiding? Who else is involved? Liam didn't look scared. He just smiled. If you want answers, you'll get them. But you're not ready for the truth, Caleb. It will destroy you. Caleb held Liam by the collar, feeling his anger spreading through his body. He wanted to make this man talk, to tear every word and secret from him that kept his wife trapped. Liam, maintaining his confidence, calmly looked at him, as if he didn't care that he was one step away from danger. You don't even understand your position, Caleb, Liam said, his voice remaining cold. You think you have control, but in reality, I control everything, including your life. Who's behind all this? Caleb insisted, tightening his grip on the collar. Who is forcing Laurel to obey your orders? Liam raised his hand to straighten his collar but didn't resist. His smile disappeared, and his voice became more serious. There are people you're better off not knowing about. They're not just rich or influential. They're the ones who create the rules we all play by. They decide who survives and who gets destroyed. Caleb felt his heart racing. He saw confidence in Liam's eyes, but now there was something else, fear. Not obvious, but something he hid behind a mask of coldness. And you're just a pawn in their hands? Caleb released his grip and took a step back. You're as afraid of them as Laurel is? Fear of them means survival, Liam replied, straightening his clothes. Now imagine what happens to those who refuse to play. Caleb took another step back, trying to process what he had just heard. One question kept repeating in his mind. How far had Laurel gone to protect their lives? He couldn't let this continue. He needed the truth, but he felt that every next step could turn against him. Liam, taking advantage of his confusion, moved toward the balcony doors. You're searching for answers, Caleb, but every one of them will lead you to more questions. You want to protect Laurel? Then go home and stop this. You think I'll stop? Caleb took a step forward. You don't know me, Liam. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family. How heroic, Liam said mockingly, opening the door. But heroes often become the first victims. Caleb stood on the balcony, watching Liam walk toward another group of people in the room. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his ears. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to act. Descending into the hotel lobby, Caleb paused to calm himself. He needed to gather his thoughts before taking the next step. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. If you want to help Laurel, meet me in the park in an hour. Come alone. This message could be a trap, but Caleb felt he had no choice. He quickly left the hotel and headed to the designated place. The park was empty and quiet, with only a few people strolling along the paths. Caleb approached the bench he had seen in the photo from the message and waited. After a few minutes, he noticed a woman approaching. She looked familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her before. She sat on the bench next to him, holding a small black purse. You're Caleb, she said, more of a statement than a question. And who are you? He replied, tense. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I can help you. And I know you need it. Caleb didn't answer, just silently stared at her. She opened her purse and pulled out a small packet of documents. This is everything you need to know about Liam and those behind him. But know this, each of these pages is a door to a world you may never return from. Caleb took the documents, his hands slightly trembling. He opened the package and saw diagrams, contracts, and photographs. Some of the people were unfamiliar to him, but among them was Laurel. He felt his heart tighten. Why are you doing this? He asked, looking at the woman. Because I know what it's like to be trapped, she replied, standing up from the bench. Sometimes we have to help those who still have a chance to break free. She walked away, leaving Caleb alone with the documents, which now seemed even heavier than before. He knew what he had to do. He needed allies. But who would be willing to help when everything going on was so dangerous? Caleb decided to go back home. His first task was to understand what exactly was written in these documents and try to find some sort of plan. He was ready to take risks. For himself, for Laurel, and to put an end to this game. Caleb sat in his living room, intently going through the documents the mysterious woman had given him. Each page, each photograph, every line confirmed one thing. Liam was not the main player in this scheme. But what he found next turned everything upside down. One of the contracts signed by Laurel contained a clause that clearly indicated her active involvement in creating and concealing financial fraud. Her signature was next to Liam's. Caleb felt his heart squeeze. All her words about blackmail, fear, and trying to protect their family now seemed completely different. He remembered how she had lowered her eyes, how she had tried to avoid his questions. Her confusion, her tears, it had all been an act. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice. Caleb could no longer sit still. He decided he had to get to the truth, no matter what. He dialed Laurel's number, but she didn't answer. Her phone was constantly busy. That only deepened his suspicions. He knew where to find her. The same office building where he had seen Liam. Caleb got into his car and drove there. This time, he wasn't trying to be careful. His anger was stronger than his fear. By the time he reached the office, it was getting late. He went up to the top floor and walked down the corridor to the glass doors, behind which he heard voices. He saw Laurel and Liam standing together, talking. Laurel looked calm, even confident. She didn't resemble the woman who had cried in front of him just a few days ago. Caleb barged into the room, slamming the door so hard that the sound echoed. Liam merely smiled, while Laurel flinched but quickly regained her composure. "Caleb, what are you doing here?" she asked, as if she had seen him by accident. "Me?" Caleb stepped forward, holding the documents in his hands. "I came to find out how long you plan to keep me in the dark." She stayed calm, but there was something in her eyes he couldn't quite recognize. "I don't understand what you mean," she said in a steady voice. Caleb threw the papers onto the table in front of her. The contracts, payments, your name next to his," he nodded toward Liam. "All of this isn't blackmail. It's not about forcing you. It's your own choice." Laurel looked at the documents, then turned her gaze back to Caleb. There was no remorse in her eyes, only cold certainty. "And what will you do now?" she asked quietly. Caleb couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're not even going to try to deny it? Not going to explain?" She took a step forward, looking him straight in the eye. "Why should I? You've already figured it all out. Yes, I worked with Liam. Yes, I knew it was dangerous. But you never understood how much I wanted more." "More?" Caleb repeated, feeling his anger boil up. "More of what?" "More of everything," she said, her voice turning sharp. "More money, more freedom, more power. And you? You always wanted stability, security." It was boring, Caleb. A wave of despair washed over him. He looked at her and saw a completely different person, not the one he had spent so many years with. "You used me," he said, more to himself than to her. "I protected us as long as I could," she replied. "But you left me no choice when you started digging." Liam, who had been silent up until then, finally spoke. "She's right, Caleb. You could have stayed out of this and lived peacefully. But now you're jeopardizing our whole operation." Caleb turned to him, but he didn't manage to say anything. Laurel took a few steps back toward the table and pressed a button. The doors behind Caleb opened, and two men entered the room. They looked like professional guards, and Caleb realized it was a trap. "Here is the translation. You made a big mistake coming here," Laurel said. "Now you know too much." Caleb stepped back, trying to find an exit. "Laurel, don't do this," he said, but her face remained impassive. "You did this to yourself, Caleb," she replied. "I warned you." The men grabbed his arms and started pulling him towards the exit. Caleb struggled, but the forces were unequal. "This isn't the end," he shouted as they dragged him out of the room. Laurel remained standing by the table, watching as he disappeared through the door. Her face stayed calm, but there was a trace of doubt in her eyes. When Caleb was taken out of the building and put into the car, he realized that now he was alone. He had lost everything he once considered his life. But he wasn't about to give up. He knew he had to find a way to come back and punish those who had ruined his life, even if it meant fighting until his last breath. Caleb sat in the dark basement where Liam's men had brought him. His hands were tied, but despite this, he felt his resolve growing. Everything that had happened, every lie Laurel had told, every humiliating moment, made him fight. He didn't know how much time he had left, but he was sure of one thing. He wouldn't stay here long. The basement door opened, and one of the guards entered. The man placed a bottle of water on the table in front of Caleb, but did not leave. His figure was large and intimidating, but Caleb noticed he carried himself arrogantly, as if not expecting any resistance. "What's next?" Caleb asked, looking straight into the guard's eyes. "Next, you'll disappear," the man replied coldly. "But first, Liam wants to clarify something." "Want to play again?" Caleb gritted his teeth, but his gaze was calm. The guard didn't reply and simply left, closing the door behind him. Caleb quickly began scanning the room. There weren't many things: a few cabinets, chains on the walls, and an old pipe running along the ceiling. He stood up from the chair, carefully checking how tightly the ropes were tied. At that moment, the door opened again. The same woman who had given him the documents in the park stood in the doorway. She looked calm, but her eyes betrayed tension. "We don't have much time," she said, walking towards him. She took out a small knife and quickly cut the ropes on his hands. What is this? Caleb asked, looking at her. This is your chance. I can't save you from everything, but I can give you a way out. They plan to get rid of you soon. If you don't escape now, you won't have another chance. Caleb nodded, but his thoughts were already racing ahead. He had to find a way to end this once and for all. As the woman led him through the dark corridors, he memorized everything. The paths, the doors, the guards on duty. They reached the outside, and she pointed to a car parked nearby. Go, and don't look back, she said. Why are you helping me? Caleb asked before getting into the car. Because someone has to, she replied. But be careful. Liam and Laurel won't stop while you're alive. Caleb started the car and drove off, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. He no longer felt fear, only resolve. Over the next few days, Caleb gathered everything he had, documents, photographs, records. He realized that the best way to destroy Liam and his allies was to use their own tools. He contacted a journalist known for his investigations. The journalist agreed to help, as long as Caleb provided enough evidence. A week later, the story about financial fraud, blackmail, and the involvement of influential people in the schemes hit the front pages of the news. Liam was arrested, and many of his accomplices started disappearing from the public eye. Laurel couldn't escape the attention either. Her career was ruined, and her relationship with Liam became public knowledge. Caleb, despite everything, didn't feel joy. He looked at the ruins of his past life, realizing that he couldn't just go back to normality. But he knew he had made the right choice. He had stood his ground, despite all that was lost. One day, he stood at the doorstep of his new home. The wind carried the scent of freedom. He took a deep breath, feeling the light of a new beginning wash over his soul. He had survived, and this was just the beginning of his new life. What will you choose? Move forward or stop, not knowing the answer? Leave your thoughts in the comments.